Welcome to the Resilient Rehab Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Effer.
Today we're going to be talking about how to build an effective warm-up. Now, there are different perspectives when it comes to the characteristics that make up a warm-up. Traditionally, they were used as traditionally, people would just go on the treadmill or some type of cardio device, and they would just try to get their heart rate up. Now, I don't believe that doesn't have a place in a warm-up. I do believe that there are other components to think about. And there's other perspectives where they don't believe a warm-up is necessary at all. You just walk in, maybe you do a couple warm-up sets of a specific exercise like a squat. Maybe you do warm-up sets into a working set. And again, that's not inaccurate either. That also has a place. With that being said, I tend to think of a warm-up and create my system of a warm-up based on what I'm seeing from an assessment standpoint and based on what somebody is going to need in order to fulfill their goals, but also in order to match up with what the session is going to provide them from a resistance standpoint and from a conditioning standpoint. And I value the warm-up a lot in order to address some movement limitations, but also to reinforce some of the strengths that they may have. And so when I am when I'm thinking about creating a warm-up, I'm thinking about different categories. Yes, I'm thinking about the physiological changes like increasing heart rate, right? Increasing some type of, I'm trying to increase heart rate, but I'm also thinking about a biomechanical standpoint. What kind of biomechanical movement limitations am I looking at trying to address? Are there specific type of biomechanical movements that I want to include in order to restore maybe the position of the joint, to improve mobility or reduce tension in certain areas? And then I'm thinking about neurological. Can I apply both the physiological and the biomechanical and hold on to those type of changes that I've made and apply some type of neurological stimulus, whether that is speed, whether that is some type of plyometric movement, whether that is landing, jumping, throwing, whatever it is, in order to start to increase the excitability of the nervous system so that when they go into the session, they have all these buckets in place. So when I'm organizing my warm-up, I'm thinking about certain types of things. First, I kind of do some type of like reset where I'm doing some kind of positional drills. And that's not for everybody. I don't usually use that category for some people. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say usually. I usually use that for some people. And sometimes I don't use it. Sometimes I skip it. And I go right into some of the more dynamic movement stuff. So I've got my reset, which is positional drills based on what I saw from an assessment. Then I will go into dynamic drills that work based on this neurological developmental sequence, which basically just means that I'm working from the ground up. Because if I do a positional drill, let's say I'm getting them to do a breathing drill on their back, and then I get them to stand up and they're doing something dynamic, the transferability may be difficult because what I'm doing is I'm adding different levels I'm adding less constraints because I'm getting off the ground, so I don't have as many body parts in contact with the ground. And I'm forcing the body and the system to now have to integrate against gravity and use all these different systems and different muscle tensions and biomechanical positions in order to stand up against gravity and then do it in a reciprocal and dynamic way. That's very difficult to get that transfer. And so I like to think about working from the ground up, starting on my back, maybe going on my side or going on my hands and knees, then starting to do stuff that are a little bit more unsupported, right? So think of something that's supported, like maybe I'm bending over and putting my hands on a bench and doing some type of breathing drill, like a toe touch, or I'm doing like a wall squat, or I'm doing some type of half kneeling position. It's a little holding on to some type of band. So it's a little bit more supportive. Holding on to a TRX is another great example. To then moving into something that's a little bit more unsupported, where now I'm holding on a weight and I'm walking back and forth. I'm doing a lateral lunge, right? I'm just working up against gravity. So I'm making my way off of the ground in more of this sequential movement. And sometimes It's not as rigid as that. Like sometimes I can do something like an arm bar, which integrates a bunch of different things. Or I do a half get up that gets me from my back to this kind of like half kneeling side lying position, right? Maybe I'm just doing a Turkish get up and that incorporates all of it, right? That's a great way to think about this. But effectively what we're doing is reducing the amount of constraints and stability that is used from the ground and starting to get our body to coordinate it by itself. And I'm doing this again based on reinforcing what I thought that the positional or the reset drills needed in order to accomplish their goal. Maybe they're missing hip internal rotation on the right and shoulder external rotation on the left. And so I'm doing positional drills in order to restore the position of the joint and the rib cage to improve that. Then from a dynamic movement standpoint, I am still thinking about reinforcing the same thing. So maybe they have an arm bar, and maybe what I'm doing is I'm getting them to go from left to right first before they go from right to left. And that will then start to reposition certain joints in a dynamic manner. I'm getting them to do it and recruiting the certain muscles because I've put them in the position to allow them to do so. Then I'm going onto my hands and knees, and maybe I'm doing something where they've got one hand on top of something. Maybe they got their left hand on top of something that causes them to turn towards that left side. That is going to effectively improve the ability for the left shoulder externally rotate and the right hip to internally rotate because I'm turning towards that left side. And then I'm thinking about doing that in a more dynamic manner. Maybe I have a left rack position where I'm holding a kettlebell on my left side, pointing that elbow straight, again, to open up that left back, while I have my right arm holding a kettlebell or dumbbell in a suitcase position beside my side, which is then going to reinforce the internal rotation on that right side. Because by having the weight on the right side of my body, that is going to cause me to have to turn in more because the dumbbell's pulling me outside of my foot, outside of my base of support. But then I'm going to have to reflexively and reactively pronate the foot to bring myself back in. But because I've got this rack position on the left side, that's going to help open up my left back. So that pronation is going to turn my body to the left and open up my back. So now, again, I'm reinforcing all the same movement patterns, but in a dynamic way. And then I can apply the same concept to the more reactive or the neurological plyometric part of the warm-up, where now maybe I'm doing some kind of med ball scoop toss against the wall. Maybe I'm doing a lateral lunge to the left or lateral lunge to the right, pushing off as I throw and catch to the left, right? So I'm doing a lateral lunge to the right as the med ball comes beside my body. I throw it against the wall and I catch it on that left side because that is going to create internal rotation through that right side by pushing me out of that side. And then by catching it on the left side, that is going to cause my rib cage to turn to the left, again, reinforcing the left thoracic rotation. Maybe I'm doing some kind of lateral bounding, or maybe I'm doing some kind of box jumps or something like that, again, to reinforce that type of position. I'm not saying that I'm doing it just on one side. I may be doing it on both sides, but maybe I'm choosing one side versus the other. I know that the left side has to yield and has to accept force more, whereas the right side has to learn how to produce force in order to be able to restore some of that internal rotation on the right and the external rotation on the left. And so I can position my exercises in a certain way to accomplish that and choose the type of tissue relaxation or contraction that I'm looking for. And so again, to sum this up, I'm thinking about a warm-up as a way to target specific areas that may need more support or repositioning in order to improve as much range of motion as they need to accomplish whatever their goal is, so that when they do the resistance element that has maybe less of a hyper focus on this, although we still do focus on that in the resistance training aspect, maybe we hold on, maybe we do Zercher or safety bar squat to a box or something that reinforces based on their assessment what they have, and the same thing goes for the conditioning. I can pick a certain conditioning exercise that reinforces what they may have, and that becomes even more specific and even more important, I should say, because as they start to fatigue, they're going to try to default to their original pattern that may not be the most effective way. And so by picking a conditioning exercises that helps to reinforce the movement patterns we're looking for, despite fatigue setting in, well, then we have even more of a powerful session. So a warm-up has many different ways that you can do a warm-up in many different ways. And there's not one fixed pattern. In my experience, this is the way that I have organized it to get great success with my clients. So no matter what, as long as you have a system and an idea that is being used based on the assessment of your client, you really can't go wrong. So thank you so much for listening today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.